Hello! Welcome back everyone. Second time having another episode like this, and hopefully this time I'll be slightly less awkward at the front, start of the video, because I am getting used to it. That's what I'm going to tell myself at least. So as you can probably imagine, if you're back here, obviously you want to listen to me ramble on for a while. I tried to keep that rambling down, but we obviously have a few things to talk about, because if you've watched Wollen Retold, the second episode, which again, it's very strange if you haven't, and you're listening to this, then you already know. Zook is going to be one hell of a character going forward, and none of you yet know the half of it. So, essentially, before I run into the whole details behind Zook, and all the trouble that he caused, and the player Zach and his thought process before going between the whole thing, one thing I am going to just quickly mention, that is something I did not bring up last time, strangely, is how the hell I'm able to make these videos in the first place. Because, as you might have got the impression, I played this Wollen campaign through to its end, 15 sessions through and an epilogue, a couple years ago. So one might wonder, without knowing how exactly, I have such a definitive memory that I seem to have all the beats of what happened from years ago, from the first and the second and so on sessions, and the reality is I don't. I've got a terrible memory, and what it really helps me out is that I've thought ahead, in a way. Never planned to make these videos originally, but at the time, when I started doing this old DM thing for the first time and playing Wollen, I obviously had my concerns about my poor memory, and the fact that, especially in an open world campaign where they'll be able to go as players back and forth freely where they want to be, whenever they want, and doing whatever activities they prefer to do, I did need to keep track of so many details, and what that meant, and it is as bad and agonizing as it probably sounds, at the end of every long day of playing a session, what I would do, I would force myself to go home, and instead of relaxing or taking a rest or dealing with some of the headaches I used to get quite a lot when I started DMing, because there was so much just mental effort and poorly allocated places to use that sort of mental energy, because I didn't know what to focus on, what to keep in my mind at all times, what things just kind of like leave on a note. I was a mess. I've got a lot better over time, becoming a little bit more streamlined and organised in how I DM and what information I'm keeping track of at all times in my head and so on else. But yes, DM brain, as I called it, headaches used to be a huge thing. So to help me solve that problem, I found my ways, but, sorry, what I mean to say is that, unfortunately, that DM brain would lead me to come home, and even when I was usually just miserable after a session, having enjoyed it regardless, it did result in me still writing down excessive, and I do mean excessive details. You hear how much I ramble in these videos and talk endlessly in circles, so you can only imagine how my own notes that are for me only to read must have seemed. Extensive amounts, sometimes 2 hours of just pure writing at the end of the long day when I am tired and buggered and over it, and there's nothing I want to do less in the world. I still write down all the details that are fresh in my mind before I've gone to sleep, and I can still remember every little thing that's pretty much happened. And for all the agony that it was, and how I always dreaded and hated it, the one upside is that now I can make these videos by consulting these notes from years ago that still have every little detail I could possibly need. It allows me to take the core information and streamline a 10 to 15 minute video, which I just summarize and add a few crappy jokes in between to kind of keep someone entertained as they watch the Wollen Retold series. And that's how I did it. I'm grateful that I did. It wasn't fun at the time, but a lot of DMs, if they want to do what I do, would have to start fresh, mostly, I think, unless you had the benefit to record it at the time, which I did not, or if they had an excessively good memory, then unfortunately most people be out of luck. I feel very fortunate because of my circumstances, because I happen to make a very wise, if painful, choice for myself a while ago. I have been able to tell literally the story of my first ever D&D game that I DM'd. It's cool. It is a sense of pride for me. But anyway, that's just giving me the rundown, and it, as always, takes too long to explain that fact. But that's how I make these videos, and that's how I have all this information. That's how I can assure you that I am not exaggerating or drastically changing any major details, even minor ones even, about what happened in each session. That is literally exactly, beat for beat, pretty much the exact story. You know, it's less... definitely not talking anything ill about it, but when you look at like the animated Vox Machina show that Critical Role has made in the last few years, they did need to take a lot more creative liberties to kind of cut down the pure length, time, and amount of tiny things that happen in every single episode, so that way when they made it into a much more streamlined animation show, it was a much more minimal, much more simplified, streamlined version of itself. Wollen Retold does not need to do that, because the session itself, it's the campaign itself, it's not that long. And I can keep most of the details in, because I am literally doing a one-to-one session to episode translation. So yay me, I'm glad I get to do that. Now, moving on to the actual episode itself, the reason you came for, thank God I put chapters in these videos, eh? You probably already skipped this part. We can start with the really, comparatively speaking, unimportant bits of the episode, which is the rats returning right at the start to have a little attack, and then much later on with the Kobolds, and getting to meet Kane the Kobold, a favourite amongst the party. Because obviously the big elephant in the room about Zook is kind of the main draw and attraction, so might as well just leave him for a minute to do him last, because, you know, it's... who wants to follow up from that? So, the Were-Rats. They were fun. I really enjoyed having the ability to start off the first ever session by having this Were-Rat guy just be a dick, and then the party's like, no, we don't like this guy, and get a little scrap with him, and based on their choices and what happens, he ends up managing to escape, which could have been avoided. But thankfully they didn't, because that meant he could leave, and then at the start of the very second session, immediately I got to give my players, as something I was hoping to do from the start, hence why I started the first episode that way, I got to give them a literal example of their actions having consequences. Little did I know, they were very soon about to find that out for themselves in a much more extreme fashion, almost as if I needn't have bothered. But, at the time being, I didn't know that I had a psychopath in my group. I'm being mean to him already. Poor Zach does not deserve that treatment, but he knows what he did. But anyway, we'll get to that. Essentially, the idea was just to have the Were-Rats come back and just basically what he had done, here's his friends, whatever else is cool. It was just a fun little neat way to say like, hey, remember that thing you did? It does have action consequences. It isn't like a villain of the week sort of scenario. He does come back and he's like, hey, I'm gonna get you. It's not very special, it's not a big deal, and it's not worth making much note of. I'm well aware of that. But I simply really did enjoy the feeling of saying, hey, look, your actions are going to have consequences. You can expect this to happen. Session 1, mess with this guy. That's the very start of the session. And then immediately, the very start of the second session, right afterwards, the very next time you play, he has come back in reaction to what you have done, and depending on the choices that you have made, he is now going to act in this fashion. And I think that's brilliant. I just enjoy it. Anyway, no need to drag that on. Not everyone will share my same affinity for the freedom of choices and how cool they are is such a degree that they could obsess over it for hours in the way that I do. So, the other bit that is worth noting is the Kobold encounter, which was a lot of fun for me because it's completely silly and just stupid. They just come across a bunch of Kobolds with a flying leader and they just want to kill the sun. There's no logic behind that, as there are no logic behind the Kobold's eyes, and it was futile. There's no way they were going to succeed, and that's kind of the point. As an encounter that they easily could have just skipped or ignored or just bypassed entirely if they wanted to as a party, but they didn't. They wanted to stop and talk to them. At least the others did. Good old Zook, played by Zach, wanted to go off and do some hunting. I believe he ended up getting bit by a snake in one of the forest on the toe. Not like in a combat encounter, just a little snake bit him. And I did not feel that probably would have warranted like his own mention as a little side joke in the Wollen Retold episode, so I kind of just didn't feel the need to repeat that. But that's an example of the tiny things that I do actually kind of just tweak out that don't really become necessary later on, because, shocker, of all the things that happen in this episode, a little snake biting the end of Zook's toe was not one of the things that would have a massive campaign-defining and beyond effect on the story. Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to avoid talking about that, but just finishing the Kobolds, we did have the option, and I actually kind of designed this little encounter intentionally with the belief that this would actually be the outcome, which was that the Kobolds, all of them, were going to end up just kind of like joining the party and being their own little army for a little while, which, of course, them being very squishy and very easily killed, they are not going to last very long. Their own sense of stupidity and lack of survival instinct mean that most of them were going to get killed off in non-combat, just humorous situations, like rolling a natural one, stepping on it. It wouldn't be that ridiculous, but that was the idea. Just have something fun and give them a little bit more padding in the early levels so they're not so easily conquered. That was my idea behind the Kobolds, but unfortunately we had lovely Jacob, who plays Dane, the dwarf, just kind of get carried away, because I gave him every option after he threw the first one to pull back, to what's the word? To cancel, to call out, to back out of what he was committing to, and he never wanted to. I asked him every time, "Are you sure you want to throw the next one?" He goes, "Yeah, no, absolutely." And so he threw each one to their deaths, which is very dark when you say it like that. And finally, in the last one, I think I might have just given the notion to remind him of like his freedom of choice, which again, considering what's already happened in the episode before then, funny that I need to. But I did say, hey, you realise you don't have to throw and kill him. He's dumb, and you could probably convince him if you wanted to try and make a like persuasion check or a deception check, depending on what you want, to just join you instead. And thankfully, Jacob seemed like blown away because, oh, yeah, no, brilliant, oh, awesome, yes. And once he succeeded and got Kane to join them, he was very happy, until he realised he could have had a whole army of kobolds that he had again and again and again chosen to actively get rid of one at a time. And then he was quite sad about that, the poor guy. But anyway, those are the two sort of things that happen. Now, to the actual part of the episode that really matters, and the reason you're all probably here, Zook. Zook and his absolute tomfoolery. So, player agency. It's a hell of a thing, isn't it? Now, me choosing to be a first-time DM and choosing to make a open-world sandbox, essentially allowing them to go where they wish, at will, make their choices, no railroad, no predetermined story, no established big bad evil guy, BBEG, to deal with. Just them and their choices and where it led them. And, for all the bad things I could say about what followed with Zook and his behaviour in this episode, I will say it sure as hell led them to one hell of an interesting story. At least I think so, and if you keep watching Wollen Retold, then hopefully that means you think so as well. I allowed this psychopathic little gnome to kill an old woman, steal her extremely powerful magical weapon that I had put into her hands when I shouldn't have, as I discussed last time. And I got to watch the consequences of my actions, not as a player, but as a DM, with a nice little touch of irony in there, and how he would proceed to try to burn down my entire campaign before it truly began. Thankfully, that's not exactly what happened, and I'll try to keep any spoilers beyond this episode to an absolute minimum. But they all arrive to see the old lady, who's not shocked to hear by now that good old Zach was very keen to the table to go back and see her. Surprise, surprise. And they all sit down, they have tea again, and they're just catching up. I did not have any further planned quests for her at the time. So I thought it was going to be like a small 5-minute thing where they're just going to say hi, they talk to her, she's feeling better, whatever else, and they just get to know her more and learn more about her, and then they come back. That's not what happened. That's not even close to what happened. Now, up to this point, as I mentioned last time, our lovely Zach, as a character, as a player, sorry, he was a person who obviously was a bit shy and nervous dipping his toe into the water. I think we all were, especially everyone other than Jacob, who of course the rest of us had not played before, me, Cade, or Zach, and that lasted for one bloody session. Session 1, Zach was very chill, he was very cool, he was a bit shy, a bit quiet. Obviously he didn't know me that well, he didn't want to make, a bad first impression. I've established this last time. So I did walk away from session 1 thinking, oh, this is really nice, I have like good players that are a bit quiet, they're warming up to it still, but it's really nice to see that I don't have any like those, horror stories you hear on Reddit of like these murder hobos, and need I say more? But at the time, I truly believed, like, oh, okay, this is going to be a real nice, upbeat, hero-based, sort of like good character campaign with like no destructive antics or anything like that. It's going to be like wholesome and good and pure. How naive I was, I know, but I really thought that. And I was all for it. I'm definitely a person who obviously prioritizes player choice first, and you can see that in how things played out. But if I had my preference, if I was to railroad, I would like to see a story play out in the sense of everyone being heroes and good guys and helping out. I definitely like morally good characters, and I certainly like playing villains myself, for example. That's all well and good, but it's quite enjoyable to, I don't know, I just like heroes. I just like the good guys. I'm boring. I like Captain America more than I like Tony Stark. I know, it's weird, right? I don't think a lot of people probably share that opinion. Well, maybe they do. It is a bit more even since Civil War, but neither here or there. Don't need to be talking about Marvel. I'm sure enough channels on YouTube already do that. This is about my Wollen Retold second episode, and what follows is a hell of a thing. We know that Zook manages to get the stuff, and in an episode before, I mentioned, in this episode, I mentioned by the hair of his teeth, he manages to get it. And I meant it. When the combat encounter started, when he showed signs of aggression and tried to lunge and failed to roll in order to just snatch his stuff right away, combat began, we rolled initiative, and I kid you not, the highest person who rolled initiative was obviously Zook, but only by one. Wendy, I believe she had a total of 16, and Zook rolled in total 17. Can you just imagine how different an entire campaign and the entire story going forth would have been if she had rolled first? That would have been a fireball against all these level 1 characters. That would have been an almost definitive TPK. That could have been a real ugly start to my whole D&D experience as a person, and might have ruined the campaign before it got started. So when you put it like that, maybe it's for the best, but that's not the way I prefer to think of it, because I didn't love watching this poor old lady who truly had done nothing wrong just be brutally murdered, have her stuff stolen, and just lead to just the worst. I don't want to give Zach too much grief. I like that he felt comfortable this quickly into the second session, that he was like, no, you know what? I feel like Ben won't mind if I go ahead and try to like get a bit crazy and creative with it. And those players, in the right amount, can actually be a lot of fun when they shake up the balance. They don't play things too safe, and they take risk and allow the DM to have an ability to instruct some sort of consequence, or to have some sort of, the party member that just can't contain their excitement and touches the curse item anyway can sometimes at least lead to a more interesting outcome than the clever and wise players that obviously won't touch the thing until they've got to remove curse spell. Because, it allows just more interesting stories to happen from someone who's now been cursed, and that can become its own entire, side tangent, side quest, or maybe even like a main plot hook for the character and its the character arc. So when we had our darling gnome take this Staff of Fire, I had to make some very important decisions in real time as a DM. I needed to look myself in the face and think, do I want to railroad? The obvious answer was no, I didn't, and obviously that's where I ended up going with it. But when you were going in the second session like I did, with such an expectation of, I suppose, like I said, just it's going to be a happy, good story, they're going to be heroes, and I was already like making like thoughts ahead of time of like, depending on what choices they made, how they could be like, one day like heroes that like championed by the city and statues are built of them in their honor, cool things like that, which I would have liked to see. All that crashed and burned in my mind the second that bloody Zook started burning things. So I just had to decide, no, I will not directly, as a DM, as a godlike figure in this world that we're playing, I will not step in personally and put a stop to this. From the beginning, the players understood, and I warned them of this, there would always be, again, I know it's a cliche, right, you've all heard it before, but there are consequences to your actions. And some DMs abuse that, as I'm well aware, and use it as an excuse just to be dicks to their players, just constantly make everything that a player does, or all the party does, have a negative outcome, or just some harsh sort of treatment. I'm not a big fan of that. Obviously, I'm not a psychopath, but I do like the idea of having realistic consequences come in a sensible manner in exchange for choices that have been made. And what I specifically mean by that, because that's very vague, is I wouldn't want to stop. This is how an example, right? Guess where I'm getting this metaphor from. I wouldn't want to stop my characters in my game from obtaining an excessively powerful item that they should not have and will completely break the encounter and the balance of everything they are currently doing. I would allow that to happen, and I did. And the reason for it is because I told myself in the back of my mind, if you are got this powerful item and you are going around and doing all these things and wreaking havoc, and especially just if you are able to display a large amount of power that is getting you to achieve a lot of the goals that you want, that is going to draw a very specific kind of attention from very specific people. And that means that if I am uncomfortable or concerned about one of my players, suddenly having almost godlike power, not that that's what Zook had by no means, but it was certainly, definitely impressive amount of power for his level, then it would attract people who are powerful enough to either deal with that threat, such as, heroes and guards of cities, as well as other villains or bad people that seek that power for themselves. And then our beloved Zook and his staff that he very much depends on as a crutch would have to deal with someone who is as powerful as his staff, but also the person themselves are that strong, whereas Zook is squishy. He can deal insane amounts of damage, but if something else hits him that's quite powerful, including his own fireball, if he misuses his staff, he can destroy himself with a small amount of HP instantly. For that reason, I thought to myself, no, I can make this work, because he has to deal with the extreme pressure and stress of having such a powerful item in its place. So a lot of thoughts like this went through my head, and I had to very quickly decide I wasn't going to, stop the game and say, hey, Zach, you can't do this, mate. We're not playing this sort of campaign. You can't just murder who you want or whatever else. I almost never, under extremely rare circumstances, would I ever even consider trying to stop my players from doing any sort of thing they may try to do. There are some obviously hard rules that we have talked about and have established. These are I don't even want to really mention them, but they're what you can imagine. The really, really dark and messed up things. The things that there's something probably wrong with you as a person if you try to bring this to a table and wanted to do it, especially if everyone else is not on board with the idea of what you're talking about. So other than like some seriously, just like more like real life sort of rules is like, hey, this sort of stuff is messed up and horrible, and we would never do things like this. Outside of that, which I realize saying that out loud is strange because, I'm allowing him to murder an old lady in cold blood. So, like, that's still pretty dark, but it's just that typical thing you find in, like you see in most of your American media, and I'm sure most media in the world, where, you mustn't mention, like, certain swear words or, like suggestion, like, sexual activity, but you could absolutely, fully brutalize, shoot down, and kill hundreds of people. That's A-okay, and that's just, the strange, contradiction of the media we seem to have and the sort of a standard of Hollywood. But that's neither here or there. I allowed this powerful gnome to have his stuff, and I had to start thinking very quickly about how exactly, not necessarily in this session, but how I would quickly have something to challenge that power without making it such a threat that it's like a guaranteed, no, you are going to die to this character and your stuff is taken from you or whatever else, because then it becomes just a matter of your DM essentially saying, hey, I'm not going to personally, as a DM himself, as a person at the table, I'm not going to say you can't have this, but I am going to make a extraordinary powerful character that there's no way for you to beat or win against that will stop you and take you, because it's essentially the same thing. If anything, it's just less honest. I didn't want that. I wanted there to be an upcoming challenge, which is something I thankfully managed to do in the third session, no spoilers ahead of time, to give him an antagonistical threat where he was not forced or guaranteed to lose his encounter with that person, or perhaps to even be threatened in the first place by them if he changed his mind or decided to hold back on being completely insane with the power complex that he's developed. The idea was simply to say, like, here's a very good chance that you're going to get what's coming to you, but I will not force it upon you. I will still let your choices and how you act and whether or not you start to reconsider what you're doing all play into whether or not that big bad comes for you. And while this is not what I ended up using as my session 3 antagonist, the early idea I had was to take Wendy herself and the rewritten origin that I kind of established for her, as I mentioned in the last session. In session 1, I did not keep doing this. As I said, I made sure to stop doing this all the time. But I did end up with the idea when they were about to lose to the plant life, to have her suddenly have her walking stick be a staff of fire all along. And retroactively, that was not the end of what I established. That's all that I mentioned at the time, but what I'd actually done is I said, she, because she is an old gnome, which was just a coincidence at the time, she can be the mother of a gnome character I had established over in Labrie, in the big city that these guys have yet to get to, which is famously known, this city, for its extremely powerful magical abilities. It's the capital city of Wollen, it's the biggest city of Wollen, and magic is a really, really important detail here, as opposed to Bristol especially, which has basically no magic going on. And Wendy Tuttle had a daughter named Rebecca Tuttle. Rebecca Tuttle, was the Archmage of the Magical Emporium, making her the most powerful, like, level 20 mage on the entire island. So that's one hell of a threat. And that makes sense retroactively why that this random old gnome lady in the middle of nowhere outside the main city of Bristol, which is a place that doesn't have magic, why she had such a powerful magical item. Starts to make sense. A little bit of a gift from her own daughter to keep her safe when she's living so far from home and such a thing. And that just kind of tied together nicely. It made even more sense when all of a sudden we needed something to come after Zook and say, hey, you screwed up. And I planned for that to be Rebecca Tuttle. For a long time I sat on it as they ended up going to the other side of the island and managing to get rid of most evidence and, proof that he had in fact killed this poor old woman by burning the place down and leaving only one witness, which, as you can imagine, is significant. And surprising as much to me as it probably was to you, that Zack, as his character, actively chose not to do anything about that little girl in the witness, even though he easily could have. Which is nice, because it kind of shows that even when Zook is a monstrous little bastard, Zack as a character and as a person is a good player who has like a wide range of acting ability and different characters, as you'll see later in the future, that he can portray other than Zook, where he's not just like, Zook is a problem character, but Zack is not a problem player, and I think that's a really important thing to establish to you guys, because of course most of you listening to this would never have even met him. So I never want to give him the bad first impression. He is a good dude, he's a very good dude, he's a great player, and he is not the sort of guy who would act in any way like Zook would in the real world. Not one bit. So it made it more fun, really, just to watch him play an evil character. Now, as they end up going towards Dale, leaving behind this witness, I obviously realise I probably wouldn't be able to use the Archmage right away, because even when she comes there, tries to investigate, maybe ends up finding the witness of this little girl, and eventually start to piece together and find details about what happened, it would be outside of me as a DM breaking the rules a bit and being a little bit omniscient and just allowing things to happen despite the logical process of finding all the clues and details. I could skip past it just because I want him to encounter this person and have this threat, but that is not the way I roll. Like I said before, I do not want to actively go out of my way to unfairly pressure the entire world against a certain person for their actions, good or bad. With that being the case, that meant as they made their way to Dale, and of course they dealt with the Kobolds, I was just left thinking to myself, I'm going to need to find a way in order to make a new character, an antagonist that is going to be significant, one that I had not planned from the outset, who did not exist prior to the third episode, and at least in my mind, of course. In lore world-wise, he naturally did, and retroactively, but I had to design someone that would be a conceivable threat, that could deal with Zook, and could not instantly kill him, but instead give him options and lead his own behaviour, should he continue to act in the way that he has, to become easily challenged and probably defeated by a much more powerful creature. The idea of literally taking a big fish in a small pond and putting him into the ocean, and then letting him see that he's not nearly as big or as powerful as he thinks he is. But we'll get more to that next time. The last thing I think I'll say, because I've rambled for long enough, and I'm very sorry if I end up just going way too much in circles just talking about the big event of Zook killing the old lady. The last thing I think is worth mentioning is how I intentionally did not change or amped up or rebalance any of the encounters that I had planned, like the bandits they fight on the road, for example, once Zook gets the Staff of Fire. I do the exact same thing whenever my players level up, because it's a great feeling leveling up. You feel way more powerful, you've got more abilities, new things are unlocked. Most often you get like a new spell or something, and it's a huge deal. You get to feel more powerful. And nothing, I think, could feel worse in any video game or any TTRPG that you play if you finally get this big boost in power, and then every enemy that you fight immediately afterwards also becomes equally more powerful. So you don't actually feel any difference than you did before, because everyone else just scaled up with you directly. That's not fun. A great amount of fun is getting to feel like that power makes a difference, and like the gameplay you're probably watching in the background right now of Dark Souls Remastered, if you're not listening to this on Spotify instead. It's just fun to watch a character go back more powerful and completely eat through the things that used to be powerful and strong against them. So for that reason, whenever my players level up, I keep all the enemies at the lower level they were accustomed to beforehand for the good little while, for the first few fights they have, so they feel like they're stronger, and then eventually new threats come in that actually do balance against them quite well, letting them kind of just walk quite easily for a while. And I did the same thing with Zook. If I was going to make this gnome come crashing down to the ground, the least I could do is let him enjoy that power for a little bit first. And that's all I've got to say for now. Thank you for listening. sorry for rambling again, and I'll see you next time for what will be an extremely exciting and very fun breakdown of perhaps one of my favourite episodes in this entire story. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.